Recording in progress.
Okay, I think everybody's here. Welcome to the March 11th Regional Board meeting. I want to recognize we're having this meeting on the traditional territory of the Tla'amin people. We have the agenda in front of us, and as far as I know, it's been updated appropriately. Is that correct, Corporate Officer?
Yes, thank you, Chair, with the addition of 5.1 and 12.2 as addenda.
Okay.
They're marked as addenda.
Okay, thank you very much. Everybody's cool with the agenda. Would somebody like to move it? Director Gisborne, seconded by Director McClellan. Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carried. Minutes of the February 26th board meeting. Any errors or omissions? No hands, so if somebody want to move those, Director Southcott and Gisborne. All in favor? None opposed. Motion carried. No delegations or inquiries, and item 5.1, referenced by the corporate officer. Resource Recovery Center financing status update. How do we want to move this? You guys, Warren?
I guess my question to the corporate officer is, as this motion was postponed, we don't need a mover and seconder. Is it just still alive, or?
Thank you. So it is on the table. It does not require a mover and a seconder, but it may be withdrawn at any time before a decision or amendment with unanimous consent of the members. So I'm saying that because at Finance Committee today, the Finance Committee has put forward item 2 on here. So
any chance we can get unanimous withdrawal?
I would be happy to move that.
Well, it's not really a moving it thing, I believe.
Or request.
Yeah. Is everybody happy with removing item 1?
Yes.
I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up, but not.
Question.
Sure, go ahead.
So the motion that was tabled till now talks about a scenario where we are using community works funds, which we don't want to do. If we don't make the motion, does it default to 2.5 in borrowing?
Well, I think it's if we just rescind it, then we move on to item 2.
yeah, so if we withdraw it, if everyone agrees to withdraw it, then number 2 can be moved and seconded.
Okay, thanks.
So do we have unanimous acceptance that we withdraw the motion? Okay, it looks like we do. So let's move on to item 2 then. How do we want to proceed? Dr. Gisborne.
I would like to move the motion. I would like to also have an amendment, but I'll wait for discussion first.
Okay, Director, we have a mover and seconded by Director McCormick and Dr. Gisborne.
Yes, I recall we had another long-term borrowing of another amount, and I think we ended up settling on a 20-year term rather than a 25-year term, but that was a number of months ago, and I can't entirely remember. I just recall that it's, you know, you pay more per year, but you don't spend as much on those long-term borrowing costs. So I guess my question through the chair to our staff is, what would be the impact of going with a 25-year term versus a 20-year term?
The officer had your hand up first, and then we'll go to Ms. Greenan.
I think Ms. Greenan can answer the impact. I will say that originally 30 years was discussed, and then 25 years was where we landed.
Ms. Greenan, do you have anything else to add to that?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I should have anticipated this, but I just have to quickly look up the difference in the price or in the debt payment.
We could split that part off till the first part and come back to it.
Give her a moment.
I think all has to go.
We did discuss the terms way back when, whether it's a 20 or 25.
I guess part of my brain doesn't get access for long enough.
And if I can, the bylaw says up to 30 years. So if there's a need to change, I think that
We can accommodate to change.
Okay. If it's going to take a bunch of time, it's not the end of the world.
Okay.
No, sorry. Thank you, Chair. I do have it here. So basically, it's not a huge difference. It's a $15,000 per year difference. oh, sorry, that's 3 years. Sorry, you want to go from 25 to 20 years. So that difference is. $25,000 per year. So it would mean we'd have to increase the waste management budget by $25,000 per year to go to a 20-year term rather than a 25-year term.
And as a quick follow-up question, and how much money would we save overall between the 25 and the 20-year in debt refinancing? 25 a year.
We would save over the 20-year term, we would save $631,000.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments to be made on this item? Seeing none, well, guys, we'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Correspondence, we have one item of correspondence. I don't know if anybody wants to pull that to do anything, any business regarding it. No hands, so we'll move on to the consent agenda. Does anybody want to pull something from the consent agenda? And no hands, so would somebody like to move that agenda? Directors McCormick and Gisborne, all in favor? None opposed, motion carries. We are down. Oh, what's happening here?
Wait on.
I hit something wrong. 10.1. Circular Economic Accelerator Program Partnership Request. We have a recommendation in front of us. How would like to move?
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you. Seconded by, thank you, Director Southcott. Any discussion? Director Gisborne.
Said it before, I'll probably say it again. $5,000 to the Synergy Foundation to give support to 2 businesses. I don't think is creating a wide enough benefit for the area. And I think there's already a lot of these things occurring naturally in the community. And I'm just looking at, this may be the first request and then it'll potentially grow from there. And, do we want to do 10,000 next year? Is $20,000 a year after that? I think this is the first step in, getting into bed on this kind of program, and I do not support it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any other comments? Director Southcott.
Thank you, Chair. I do support this. I think it's a essential step towards sustainability. And sustainability becomes ever more important as there's greater threats in society. I'm not going to describe them, but we take one step at a time. This is a step I truly support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Elliott.
I support this too. Our area is a little bit unique to all of the other participating areas. Being the first out the door to try and create these things is a little bit expensive, and encouraging a model that others can follow along with and maybe not have those same startup expenses is what this is all about. Gaining access to very experienced folks within the foundation to help those businesses is the real draw of the program. And since we're trying to get local, trying to be Canadian, trying to create better ways to reduce the stuff we ship in and out of our area, I think it's a good investment.
Okay. Great. And Directors, I'm going to go Fall and McCormick.
Okay, I just want to say thank you, Chair. I support this as well. I know, the motion on the agenda or before us, on the table is $5,000 for this year. It's nothing about next year, nothing about increases. It's not impossible, but we'll make decisions at that time. And if there is a request for further funding, then we would want to see, I would want to see value for it, to see what's actually happened. Right now, we're supporting this basically and for the reasons that have been given by previous commenters. I think it's a good idea to do, and we'll see whether this provides a tangible benefit to our regional district. And I think it will be really important for us to keep, to really enhance our ability to be more circular in our economy and more resilient. Thank you.
Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. There's a whole lot of initiatives for families to reduce, reuse, recycle, but there's not a lot for industry. And so I really think this is particularly important because it's going to provide incentives for a group of individuals and businesses in our community who aren't getting a lot of help. We don't accept ICI material, for example. So, you know, I think this initiative is particularly important because it's going to reduce, you know, what we receive in the way of waste from our businesses, and it's very important for moving forward.
Great. Thanks very much. Director Lennox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm prepared to, provisionally approve, vote in favor of this motion. As I said at committee, we're going to need some results out of this. So I think 1 year is reasonable for a reasonable investment, and really trying to knock down waste in our area here. So I'm prepared to support it. Thank you.
Seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Director Gisborne opposed. Motion carries. Item 10.2. Summary of public notice and consideration of alternative public notice bylaw. How would like to do this?
Move the recommendation.
Thank you. Director Fall moves it, seconded by Director Southcott. Discussion. Director Gisborne.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessary. We are looking at a big increase in our communications line item in our general administration on the budget. I think using local paper and talking about local economies, that's what we do. That's what we do right now is we do advertising in the local paper. We do advertising in Qathet Living. And I think that's fine to support, especially when we're looking at a budget of over $100,000 for communications. So all I see is, yes, we can pass this motion, but it's going to result in more, another staff report with another bylaw, a proposed bylaw. And I think that the purpose for the change in the legislation was so that communities that don't have local papers can still meet the legislative requirements to provide information to their community. We still have local papers. So I know there's a bit of other items related to advertising on in Parksville that doesn't preclude us from also using the other avenues of community notices, but I don't see the Parksville paper being that much of a financial barrier, especially when we're essentially doubling our communications budget. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much, Director McCormick.
Thank you. I'm also not in favor of this. I'm satisfied with the way we do things now, with the exception that Lasqueti needs to be changed because the advertising in Parksville has been pointed out isn't the most appropriate venue for advertising to reach residents of Lasqueti. So yeah, I don't see a need to redo this.
Thank you, Director Elliott.
I'm in favor of the motion, and this isn't about changing things that work with our local paper. This isn't about trying to change things for areas that are working. This is about staff bringing forward a bylaw that allows them to do things different, maybe in Lasqueti or areas where the legislative system doesn't work. And in order to do something different than what is legislated, we need a bylaw to allow that to happen. And whether it's a bylaw that only applies to Lasqueti or Lasqueti and some other small areas or not, it still requires one. And so in order to enable staff to bring us back something that makes sense for those areas, I'm in favor of the motion.
You, Director Southcott.
Thank you, Chair. Director Elliott pretty much took the words out of my mouth. But I just wanted to add that I do respect our local publications, our local newspapers, and their value very much. This is a time of where communications has never been more important. I respect the explanations that staff brought to us when this was first presented to us. And so I agree that I support staff having the greatest flexibility and capability of looking after communications needs, and we need the bylaw for that. We need what they've suggested to us that they need. So I wholeheartedly support it. Thank you, Chair.
Director Fall and then Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to point out, I mean, the motion before us is to direct staff to bring forward a draft bylaw to take advantage of the changes that the province made to legislation about public notices. So it's actually about giving local governments, including the QRD, more flexibility. So even though developing a bylaw may cost some money in terms of staff time, it actually, the current mechanisms aren't excluded. So in other words, we could continue to do what we're doing, but it will allow more options. In other words, we could make more efficiency in terms of using dollars for communicating with the public. It doesn't necessarily mean more dollars. It might mean less dollars, but it will certainly mean the dollars we spent will be better used to reach public, like spending money, the Lasky issue of spending money on the Parksville Collicum news that most people don't read, or maybe they use for Firestarter. I mean, they do come to the island, but they don't get delivered compared to our local newspaper, which doesn't meet the requirements. And that's just one issue, but I mean, generally, it just would increase the tools we can use, so the dollars we use for public communication and for notices can be more reaching the people more efficiently, which will either reduce costs or make more efficient use of the dollars that we allocate. So for those reasons, I'm in favor of this.
Thank you, and Director Gisborne.
Yeah, good conversation going around the table. I think the issue that I think we can all agree upon is that the notice, or community notice, has an issue with Lasky Island. So I would actually propose an amendment that would read that the board directs staff to bring forward a draft alternative notice bylaw, comma, specific to Area E, comma. And then it would read to a future committee of the whole meeting for consideration.
See your hand up there.
Well, we do have a gap on Savory Island as well. We're reaching them, so we would likely explore that area. That was originally one of the items that directed us to bring it forward.
So a friendly amendment would be Area E and Savory Island.
Are you proposing that amendment?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that amendment? Seeing no seconder. So, I did see, although, Director Lennox's hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I know it's getting dark on the East Coast here. You probably can't see me. Thanks, Chair. I am prepared to support this notice. I appreciate the comments the other directors have, but in my mind, if we're increasing flexibility and not taking any options away, I think we're in a better place, and we'll let our staff come up with the specifics that work for each individual area. And I appreciate the other comments. Thanks.
Okay, great. One last, if you can.
Just clarifying, so the amendment was not seconded. Okay. So when we're talking about options and flexibility, my understanding of the legislation for public notice is this is what we must do in order to meet those legislative requirements. That doesn't mean that we're not allowed to use our other tools to advertise and let people have notice. It doesn't say, okay, you have to put it in the paper, but you're not allowed to put it at the notice board. At the Myrtle Pond notice board, we have to also put it at the front of the office notice board. So we already have those options available to us. The alternative notice bylaw, what it actually says, or the intent of the legislation is, hey, you no longer have to use the newspaper. You no longer have to use the magazines. You no longer have to use what you have historically been required to do. The only way to not use the default in the legislation is to have an alternative notice bylaw. In my opinion, that's what this is about. It's not about getting more options. It's about meeting the legislative requirements, but not having to use the local paper. That's kind of my understanding of it, because if we don't pass this bylaw, we still have to use, the local paper under the Local Government Act, but we can still use Facebook and, the Little Pond community notice boards and things like that. So we already have all those options at our disposal. What this would do is give our organization more flexibility to choose, hey, we don't have to put it in the local paper. That's one of the, like, that's kind of the intent of the legislative changes, is that you're no longer required to use the paper anymore. So I'm not in favor of it. And I would have been in favor of it if it was a change specific to the areas of concern, such as Lasqueti Island and Savory, but that's not what we're discussing. Thank you, Chair.
Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. I think that gets into debating the actual wording within the draft bylaw that hasn't come forward yet and presupposes what could be in that draft bylaw. I would like to give staff the opportunity to bring back the bylaw, and we can debate the wording within that bylaw when it comes forward. At this point in time, I'm in favor of receiving that draft and all the ideas that staff have, and we can adopt a bylaw that works for us when the time comes. Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other hands, we're gonna call the question on this. All in favor? Any opposed? Director Gisborne opposed. Motion carries. I have no reports. We're moving on to bylaw. 4.1. Somebody like to read that one?
Sure. I move that the board give first and second reading of Qathet Regional District Cemetery Regulation Amendment Bylaw number 511.12, 2025.
Seconded by Director Southcott. Any discussion? None. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
I move that the board give third reading of Qathet Regional District Cemetery Regulation Amendment Bylaw number 511.12, 2025.
Seconded Southcott. Any discussion? Favor? Any opposed? Motion carries.
And I move that the board adopt Qathet Regional District Cemetery Regulation Amendment Bylaw number 511.12, 2025.
Seconded by Director Southcott. Any discussion? None. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. 12.2.
I move that the board give first and second reading of Resource Recovery Center and Waste Transfer Station Loan Authorization Amendment Bylaw number 587.1, 2025.
Seconded by Director Southcott. Any discussion? No hands. All in favor? None opposed. Carried.
I move that the board give third reading of Resource Recovery Center and Waste Transfer Station Loan Authorization Amendment Bylaw number 587.1, 2025.
Seconded by Director Southcott. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Moving on to new business. I notice a motion from Director Gisborne.
Yep. The first one is a notice of motion, which is I'm intending to bring forward a proposed Nootka Street zoning amendment bylaw, which is essentially the bylaw that we saw at our planning committee meeting, with the exception that it has had the property site specific language removed from it. And then at our planning committee meeting and board meeting, I believe we can take a look at those and have a good fulsome discussion at that time. And I just wanted to make sure that this gets in front of everyone. And I will also point out that there is a mistake on it because it was essentially a copy and paste of what we saw. And that is the second whereas, which says requires that local government must consider every application for an amendment to a zoning bylaw. That should not actually be there, because this is not in relation to the specific application. This is something a little different, but it gets the intention across. So that's why it says a notice of motion, so that everyone has it before them and no big surprises.
Okay, item 13.2.
And 13.2 is an actual motion that I would hope, I guess I'll move it and see if someone seconds it.
Yes, let's see if we get a seconder. Director Lennox seconds it.
Okay.
Director Gisborne, you want to speak to it?
Thank you. Yes, we've had quite a bit of discussion in relation to the Nootka Street zoning bylaw and its consistency/inconsistency with the Area B official community plan in relation to its restrictions on access to housing, particularly accessory dwelling units, which are considered to be a form of affordable housing. Our planning committee had the motion that's in our agenda for it back in November, and that motion was referred to staff. This is not in relation to a specific property, but in relation to the entire Nootka Street neighborhood. And I'll just point out that the Nootka Street zoning bylaw, one of the purposes for it is to ensure consistency in the area. And that's one of the reasons why I think, as there is growing pressure in the area to allow more forms of affordable housing, that we should really look at changing the bylaw So that way it can support the accessory dwelling units, which would make it consistent with the official community plan and make consistency throughout the whole area. We heard from our staff that this report is somewhere in the workload, but I would like it to be elevated as a priority for the planning services list of priority. You notice the language doesn't say put it to the top or kick everything else aside. It's more of just saying, hey, this is a priority for our board and our planning committee. So that way, hopefully we can get it before us within the next month or two. Otherwise, the other option is the proposed bylaw, which is the previous notice of motion. So with this motion, we can just remind our staff or let our staff know that this is a priority that we would like the report brought forward. Thank you, Chair.
Do I see any other hands for discussion? Director Southcott?
Thank you. Question with regard, I understand Director Gisborne's thinking, but what doesn't come through clearly to me is the reason for urgency on this. If my memory serves me correctly, the board has already waived any enforcement action to the one applicant in that neighborhood who violated or who stood to be enforced due to having a secondary dwelling on a property up there. Almost hesitate to suggest it, but that does suggest a precedent as well. So I don't know what is the urgency for this. I personally, not understanding that there is urgency, would think that the staff's priorities for their workload is fine.
Well, I'm gonna make a comment. Oh, well, I'll let you go first, Director Elliott, and then I'll follow you.
So I have a couple of questions. The wording of the motion, does it do what we intend it to do? That's my question to staff. And then by way of comment, I understand that Director Gisborne is concerned that there are quite a few people in that area that might put applications forward and there's a fee attached, and then we would be in the same situation with those as we are with the one that we already have. Or that we would have people presupposing the outcome of a process that's down the road and this non-enforcement period of time would get shortened and have more clarity should we move forward. So I think that's where he's at. He didn't want there to be more than one folk tied up in this period of uncertainty. But my question is, the motion as read, does it do what we intend it to do, or is it not gonna, are there, that's my concern. Is this the right motion to get done what we're trying to do?
From what I think I understand is that the motion is to just elevate this requested staff report higher up the to-do list for the planning service.
Got a bunch of notice and stuff too.
Well, from what I understand, the first parts that start with that the committee, that the board directs staff and go all the way down to host a corresponding public engagement feedback session. That was moved and seconded, but it was not passed. The next motion that the committee refer it to staff was passed. So we did pass a motion to ask for a staff report. And then this motion is asking for that staff report task to be elevated higher on the planning services list of priorities.
Okay, follow-up question then.
And then Director McCormick, had your hand up? Okay.
It would make it really uncertain for everybody what it was that it was being elevated over and beyond and how that impacts current projects. And so that's a question, I guess. The uncertainty around what it is we're impacting is an unknown when we're looking at this. And so that, do we have an answer for that? No.
I don't know. I guess we could ask
That's my question.
the planning service. If Ms. Rodden is on.
Through the chair, I can answer that question.
Please do.
And I could share my screen. I have a high level one-page 2025 department work plan, if you'd like to see that.
Well, right now, we're just seeing a gray screen, so I don't know if you would actually be able to share that with.
Yes.
Oh,
He'll be
well, let me try.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
Success.
Can you see it?
Yep.
Yeah, so the current projects are listed there. Everything's listed in priority order as to when the board directed staff to work on these things, or when the province requires work to be done to meet legislated obligations around long-term planning for housing. And the outstanding reports are in date order for when the board has directed staff to work on these reports. And then, of course, we process 4 types of applications. Those are as received, they're time sensitive. So we must process those within the provincial timeline, response timelines. So the Nooka Street zoning bylaw amendment report is on the list of outstanding reports, but it's the last on the list right now. Staff can move it up if that's the desire of the board. But there's implications for current projects. And of course, we have limited capacity with only 2 staff. So our time is always interrupted by the applications that we receive.
Okay. Thank you very much, Director McCormick.
Thank you. Looking at that list, I would be hard pressed to say none of those are important projects. So I understand Director Gisborne's concern and the concern of your constituents. That's fair and that's obvious. But there's been a clear indication that there's not going to be any enforcement. And without, taking something away, I don't see how this could be elevated. So I don't support elevating it in advance of the ones that are already in the works. There's only 2 people in the planning department, and Ms. Dykstra hasn't come back yet. So staff capacity is what it is, and it's limited. And we have to respect that.
Thank you. I have a couple of comments here as well. I don't support this. I look at our staff. We have professionals on board who are very experienced and educated, and they are privy to information that we may not have when they set their priorities. And I think if we start politicizing the administrative tasks, we run the risk of throwing everything out of whack, like you were saying. We may be helping out one group, but we may be harming multiple other groups in the process. I think we need to trust our staff that they're taking everything into consideration and making the correct decisions. And as we've seen, given no other outside influences, they base it on when that was passed down to them by the board. And in this case, I know of one property owner who wants to have this done. I don't know of any others, and I don't believe any other requests have been made. Could easily make it legal for these people, and then it would be all an issue. And then when the court comes back to us, we can deal with it when it's appropriate. That's my feelings. Director Gisborne. Well, I'm going to go Director Fall and then Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. I have actually, I had 2 questions. I think I already have 1 question, and I'll make a couple points first. But my question is really, why am I being asked to vote on this? So what's the vote? So I want to confirm the voting rule here. And why I say that is I don't have a clue what the planning committee priorities are or should be, and cannot possibly make an informed decision other than what I hear from the participants in the service. So I appreciate seeing that list, and that's great. I wasn't party to all those, and I understand this is an important item. I don't doubt at all what Director Gisborne's saying, and there may be some time sensitivity to it. On the other hand, those other items all seem to be important too, and unless you went through the list and said, well, which one's which and rank them, I'm not on the planning committee. I don't have that background, so I don't know also the staff resources we've heard about, how to allocate that, because if you're prioritizing one thing, that means you're deprioritizing something else, and I don't feel comfortable making that decision when I'm not even a participant in the service. So I'll get to the question. I'll allow the question to be answered. But really, if I'm asked to vote on it, I can't see how I can possibly do this. And I think it's actually something for the planning committee that doesn't strike me as super time sensitive. It would make a lot more sense for this to go back to planning committee, and planning committee could figure it out.
Corporate officer actually had her hand up regarding.
Voting, if I could just ask Ms. Rodden to share her screen again. And I'll admit it was difficult to assess the voting rate, so we assessed it at section 208, which is general. But here we have, for example, parkland acquisition policy and target for parkland acquisition that's funded through regional parks, active transportation network, regional park on Hamel Lake. So those are items that have that are funded by every electoral area, including the city.
So maybe that relates to the question I was going to ask, which maybe I'll ask as a follow-up, which is through the chair for Ms. Rodden. Then, if this was to pass, where does it go in here, and how, what gets the pause button pushed on it, given that there isn't infinite staff resources to just take on priority. So, and I guess related to that is when would this report on the relevant motion come forward in its natural due course, anyways?
Rodden?
Through the chair. I think staff would need direction from the board on what to deprioritize. I wouldn't want to do that. The practice since I've been here has been the date order that the board directive is given. And so our focus in the department right now is very much on Savory Island. And then we're dealing with all the applications that come in. So from my perspective as the manager of planning, it's all hands on deck for the Savory OCP. And then we have to meet the timeline for completing work to support our long-term housing. So to me, that is the secondary focus for 2025. So it's Savory OCP and housing related work. And if the board would like to direct otherwise, that's fine. But I think it's your decision, not mine. It's not a staff decision.
Okay, thank you for that. And that just confirms my concern, which is just increased. I don't want to go through that discussion. I am not going to support this.
Director Elliott and then Director.
Thank you, Chair. So the list came up as a result of my question. I've seen the list and I wanted to just respond. So this particular motion, this particular goal is about housing. It may be about housing in the Nooka area, but the process could be replicated in other areas to increase housing and access to housing and people's ability to contribute to housing. Housing is a huge priority for the entire region right now. And so of the outstanding reports, I could see moving it to the very top of that one without any impacts. And the idea that if we were to create a bylaw, generally speaking, that allowed for these secondary residences wherever there's restrictions at this point, would do a lot to reduce applications for anyone wanting to do that, which anytime an application comes in, it delays everything and adds to the workload anyway. So I see it as a measure to reduce applications, which reduces the workload on staff. The reason staff had to work on this Nootka application in the first place is because there's a restriction that we're trying to remove. So it is a measure to increase access to housing, reduce workload on staff that might come forward for applications to meet those things, and could essentially help with efficiency. And so I don't think we should just dismiss it because we think I think we should provide direction in some case. This is about housing. It could have benefits to reducing applications because they wouldn't be necessary. And so perhaps we need a motion that's more specific around putting at the top of the outstanding reports. Because it will help with housing more than anything else on that list.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to Director Fall's questions and comments, oh, sorry, the voting and planning service, I think I maybe should have clarified this from the start. The motion at the very bottom says be elevated in priority for the planning services list of priorities. On the list that was up on the screen, there's a number of items there that are related to the regional park service, such as the parkland acquisition. The motion before us is specific to the planning service. So I don't think it would necessarily knock off anything that falls under, regional parks or transportation things, but specific to the planning service, which is areas A, B, C, and D. To Director Elliott's point, thank you. You're communicating way better than I think I can. This is about housing. Yes, we have had one application that came in from an individual that has built a secondary accessory dwelling unit, and they were then found to be in contravention and have therefore put forward an application to amend the Nootka Street zoning bylaw. That application was turned down. What the issue I'm finding out is not necessarily that other individuals would like to apply, but there are other individuals that are not compliant with the Nootka Street zoning bylaw, and they may or may not have already gotten an enforcement letter. Some individuals have already decommissioned their accessory dwelling unit in order to comply with the Nootka Street zoning bylaw. And because what I keep hearing from the residents up there is there appears to be widespread support to allow for accessory dwelling units, but the Nootka Street zoning bylaw doesn't allow for it. And some of the questions that come up is, well, we had an application, but it got turned down. Why was it turned down? Well, the Nootka Street zoning bylaw says that it's there to ensure consistency. Asking for this report would help us as a planning committee to understand the full impacts. If that is going to take, I saw some things up there from 2023. If this is going to take another year or two, then the motion that we had to put a moratorium on the enforcement for 1 year, we might have to then say, okay, let's make it 2 years or 3 years until we actually make a decision on what we're going to do with the Nootka Street zoning bylaw. Myself, I think it can be fairly straightforward, such as, the proposed Nootka Street zoning bylaw 321.2 that is notice of motion for later this month. We could just say, we don't need a report. We'll just plow ahead, do first and second reading of the new proposed bylaw that says everyone can have an accessory dwelling unit of 1,200 square feet. Then we do first and second reading, then we go out to the public, hear what they have to say, and then we do third reading and adoption. And then we can all go home and people can get on with their lives and they can have accessory dwelling units. However, I think out of respect for our staff, this has been put into the workload to say, hey, we would like this report. I don't think it needs to be like a 50-page document. I think it can cover all the topics fairly straightforward, such as, we're not the ones responsible for water and sewer. Those are the responsibility of the individual property owners. And this is about housing. And we do have a real serious housing issue. And I'm very concerned because what I hear up on Nootka is that it's not just one property. And there are folks that are like, well, if I put an application and then the regional district becomes aware that I'm in non-compliance, and then if it gets turned down, then they might have to face enforcement. And then we got to pass a motion for moratorium on enforcement. And I'm like, well, let's get ahead of this. That's what leadership is called. So I'm simply asking, can we request staff to elevate the priority of this report on the planning service? Not all the other things in the department, but just the planning services list of priorities. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Thank you, Director Fall.
To that, given those comments, I would like to move to refer this item to the March 25th, 2025 Planning Committee. And if I get a seconder, I'll explain.
I'll second.
Okay, second by Director McCormick.
And if I could explain, the rationale being, we've heard, Director Elliott made some good comments about, moving it up to that list of projects. Now, as Director Gisborne pointed out, this is for planning services priorities, not the planning department's workload. So in fact, moving it up to the list of reports would have no effect because, as Director Gisborne just said, that's not what the intent was. the intent of the policy is clearly about planning services, planning service issues and priorities. That's for planning committee. It's not for me to vote on. I don't want to vote for, I don't want to vote against, I don't want to vote on this at all. I want the planning committee to bring forward recommendations that make sense for the planning service given the resources. So that's the rationale for doing this. I think it's not that I totally hear housing super important, absolutely. And I think the planning committee can make progress on this and deliberate those relative prioritizations, because with all the familiarity and background with that, and figure out something, and then that could bring it forward that way. I think it is, there's time sensitivity, but not urgency. Going one more round back to planning committee, I don't see that being a problem, and it would keep the concept in discussion, because I think there's good merit to it, and it would, I think, be the proper process. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome. You've made a motion to refer.
Yes, and it was seconded. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. It was second by Director McCormick. Okay, so if there's no other discussion on the motion to refer, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? You guys weren't opposed. Motion carries.
We talked about it twice at the planning committee.
Question period. Any questions, Director Mr. Galinsky?
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to pose questions. My question relates first to item 5.1, which was the Resource Recovery Center financing status update. And I heard several terms bandied about. It's my edition says a 30-year term. I think Director Gisborne was talking about a 20-year term. And I think maybe it was a 25-year term that was landed on. So I'm hoping there can be some clarification for me there.
Yeah, I believe it was a 25-year. Everybody's nodding their heads around the table.
I thank you for that. And then I'm wondering, Chair, if the item 12.2, which is the Resource Recovery Center and Waste Transfer Station Loan Authorization Amendment Bylaw, does that pertain to the item that I just discussed?
Yes.
It does. So you were giving give first three readings to that, as I understand it. When will the bylaw come forward for final adoption, Chair?
Corporate Officer?
It needs to be sent for approval. And then once approval is received from the Inspector of Municipalities, it will be brought forward to the board for adoption.
I also saw Ms. Greenan's hand up. Did you have anything else to add to that?
Thank you, Chair. No, nothing to add.
Great, thank you. Anything else, Mr. Galinsky?
No, Chair. Thank you for the clarification. That sorts things out in my mind. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Happy to do it. Okay, we got an in-camera session, so.
I'll take it away. I move that the board move in camera, the meeting be closed to the public on the grounds that the subject matter to be considered relates to matters covered by the community charter under section 90C, labor relations or other employee relations, D, the security of the property of the regional district, and then the consideration of whether a board meeting should be closed under provision of this subsection or sub.
In camera.
Is it nap time yet?
Almost.
Jason's looking forward to a pillow, I think.
I think Director
And dinner.
And dinner, right? Yeah, well, 8 o'clock. Holy cow, yeah, that's a late one for you. You didn't have a quick bite between the two meetings?
Only thing I've eaten tonight.
We're eating when I got here.
It's the same thing. Food makes me happy.
Recording in progress.
Okay, welcome back. We have finished the in-camera session. There is nothing to rise and report on. We've reached the end of our agenda, so this meeting is adjourned. Thank you for joining us. Have a great day.
When's your ferry?
50.
Oh,
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.